Hello, I'm Matt Sage. This is your monthly magazine programme for Cambridgeshire, bringing you topical stories from Cambridge and the surrounding area. People, places, businesses and events, they are all here on Cambridge in and around. Welcome to today's Cambridge in and around. We're with aviation artist Gordan Sage. He will be talking about his aircraft paintings, the history and the research behind each work. We will also be meeting with one of the many people who have commissioned Gordan's work and visiting one of the aircraft that flew in the Battle of Britain and is depicted in one of his iconic works. The Supermarine Spitfires flew from RAF Duxford in Cambridgeshire. 19 Squadron here was the first RAF squadron to re-equip with this new aircraft in August 1938. Douglas Bader served from this famous wartime airfield, so there is certainly a no more fitting place to bring Gordan's painting, Spitfire Mark II, home for tea. Along with us is the painting's owner, retired Wing Commander John Organ, who commissioned the work. Hi John.
Hi.
What about this particular picture did you want to get out of it? Why did you commission this particular piece of artwork?
Well, I first met Gordan in 1990, which was actually the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Britain, and for me the most iconic aircraft on the Battle of Britain was the Spitfire. And so I said to Gordan, what can we actually sort of do with the Spitfire to actually sort of capture the Battle of Britain? And he came up with a couple of sketches, and I was immediately entranced, by his skills sort of with the pencil to start off with. And he came up with the plot to the effect of the Spitfire sort of flying out of the canvas itself. And I regularly would come and actually sort of look to see what Gordan was doing sort of in this regard. And it was just captivating, it really, really was. And I do think that one of the marvellous elements sort of in there is the light along the engine cowling here, which sort of really sort of does sort of, for me, sort of make the picture. But every time I look at it, that aircraft is just flying out of the canvas, so it's absolutely brilliant.
Fantastic. So Gordan, what's your particular interest with Spitfires in general?
Well, I suppose it is the most beautiful, arguably the most beautiful aircraft that's ever been designed. It epitomises the whole Battle of Britain spirit and the defiance at being invaded by a foreign power. And it looks good from any angle, in the air or on the ground, and it's just a gorgeous aircraft to paint.
And how much research did you have to do into this painting?
Research is paramount, really. There are so many different aspects that you can that you have to take into consideration, especially marks and aerials, serial numbers, that kind of thing, because there's always someone who will recognise that it's wrong, if indeed it is wrong. So a lot of research is necessary to get everything absolutely right. And I think in this case, this is a 92 Squadron Spitfire Mark IIA, and I believe I've got everything right in it. No one's ever questioned the accuracy of it today.
Right. And what's the location of the painting?
This is a sort of an archetypal Battle of Britain sky from 1940, which was a very sort of hot summer. And this is just basically over the English Channel, over the English coast, with the Messerschmitt 109 just having been shot down, and he's just banking away from his victim and is off back home for tea.
So Gordan, what's the significance of the flying jacket?
This jacket is very important to me. It's a Second World War flying jacket, RAF pilot's flying jacket. It's made by the same company that made them 75 years ago. It was left to me by a young man called George. I worked with his father at RAF Waddington, and George used to come in occasionally to do some work, and he first acquired this jacket from his father when he was 14. Not long after that, he sustained a sports injury, and following that, he contracted a terminal illness, and about 10 days before his 16th birthday, he died. but because we got on so well, whenever he came into work, he was always chatting about the RAF and history and politics and all sorts of things. He was a lovely chap. We got on like a house on fire. And I discovered a few days later, after his funeral, that he'd left this jacket to me in his will, which is, you know, a very, very humbling experience, really. And his father said he didn't mind that I had it. It didn't fit anyone else in the family. George knew that I loved this jacket anyway and was always commenting on it. And so every time I wear it, you know, I remember him. And so it's now one of my most prized possessions, and I love it.
Yeah. Is this the sort of jacket that the pilots would have worn in the Spitfire?
Yes, it is. It's the same company, as I said, who made them back in the 1940s. It's sheepskin. It's made by Irvins, so and they still make them nowadays for people like myself who appreciate sort of a beautiful piece of clothing. It's thick leather on the outside, but still nice and soft and completely wool lined, and it keeps you very, very warm. And it certainly would have kept them warm in a very cold cockpit, flying at the altitude that they did.
Yes. So Gordon and John, thanks for joining us in the studio. I believe we're going to be looking through some of Gordon's paintings up on the big screen. Well, this looks like a much younger version of you, Gordon.
Yes, this was taken some time ago, probably about 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. I was working at RAF Henlow at the time. I'd been painting for about 4 years. And my wife said to me, we've got paintings in our house, but we haven't got anything that's been done by you. You've been doing these paintings for other people. Could you do something? I don't mind if it's got aeroplanes in it, as long as it's got a nice scene.
Right.
So I constructed this painting of a sort of a quintessentially English farmyard scene, Kent, that part of the world.
Yeah.
With 3 Battle of Britain Hurricanes flying over the top, which she still owns and is very, very pleased with.
Right.
And this is it in colour. So
is this based on a real life place, or is this your own invention?
it's my own invention. I sort of looked up buildings and bits of farmyard kit and the like, and then constructed the background from there, just so the whole thing balanced out.
Right, so this is quite different from the others, and it shows more of a working RAF picture. So what's the how did this come about?
This was also done in 1990. John had some involvement in this as well. He was part of the committee who commemorated the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Britain at RAF Henlow, and I was asked or commissioned to produce a painting to reflect this, and this is what I came up with. This, fortunately, the station looks very, very similar in 1990 as it did sort of 50 years previous to that. The hangars are all still there, and so it was just a case of constructing a composition depicting the work that went on at that particular time.
And certainly on this one, I think this is where Gordon's talents were starting to be appreciated by a much, much wider audience.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't just 1 or 2 people sort of looking at his artwork. I mean, this is where all the officers at RAF Henlow decided to have a depiction of Henlow during the Battle of Britain to commemorate, that very, very important 50th anniversary. And again, this is an absolute masterpiece from Gordon, sort of with the aircraft sort of flying over, but also depicting the maintenance work that Henlow actually sort of undertook during the Battle of Britain itself.
This is actually very current at the moment. It's in its last few weeks of flying. There's the Avro Vulcan, which had been rebuilt and put back in the air over the last 3 or 4 years, and is now, due to expenditure, is now being grounded again. It's a gorgeous looking aircraft, the Avro Vulcan. It's very, very difficult to portray. It's difficult to portray its size. It flies at altitude, and this is how I've depicted it. And for some reason, I just seem to have been able to achieve the overall look of it and how it actually looks when it's flying under these conditions.
Right, this is quite
Quite powerful. Where was this? What area of the world is this depicting?
This was done for a gentleman at RAF Whitton. He was very near retiring age, a guy called Geoffrey Palmer. And he worked for Gloucester's as an apprentice in his very, very early days, and remembers the Gloucester Gladiator. It was his favourite aircraft. And this depicts Faith, Hope and Charity, who were the aircraft that were based at Malta during the Second World War, and sort of were the sort of the backbone of the defence at the time against the Luftwaffe, who were trying to overrun the island. I was particularly pleased with being able to portray a hot, dusty part of the world, something I'd not done before, and it seems to have come off quite well.
Yes, and so how did you? Is this based on a photograph? I mean, because there's a lot of detail in the building behind.
Yeah, this was a particular airfield with that backdrop to it, so it was just a case of it being very, very recognisable because that building is in there, and the aircraft, all three of them, are depicted sort of basically in operation during that time.
Right. Well, this is the Dam Busters. Who commissioned you to paint this?
This was actually done as a gift for a fellow graphics officer at RAF Waddington, a gentleman who I was very, very fond of and still in contact with. He was mad keen on the Dam Busters, and as a leaving gift for him, I've known him for many years. We worked together for many years. We're very close friends, so I decided to paint him a picture of the Dam Busters flying over the Wash. This is a print from that painting, complete with the remark in the bottom right-hand corner.
Right.
I'm just very, very pleased with it. He still owns it today, and it was an opportunity to paint the Dam Busters, which is always a joy to do, as the Lancaster's such a gorgeous aircraft. And with this setting sun behind it, as they're making their way over towards Europe.
Right. This is a Jaguar aircraft, I believe.
Yes, it is. This was the most recent one that John commissioned from me back in 2005. So that's quite an old one. I've never been that keen on jet aircraft as such, but this particular aircraft, the Jaguar, with its undercarriage being the way it is, it just makes a very, very, very interesting construction for the painting.
So, John, why did you want this painted in particular?
Well, I was at Royal Air Force Coltshall in 2000, and we held an air day there to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Battle of Britain. And at that time, Coltshall was the only remaining fighter squadron that was there during the Battle of Britain that still was flying fighter aircraft in the year 2000. So this was quite important to me, and this aircraft had its tail painted in the 60th anniversary sort of colours. It did take a few years, I suppose, for me to get Gordan to actually sort of paint it, but we finally managed to sort of get it off the ground. And again, this, the fourth commission that I've had from Gordan. I won't say the last. I'll say the fourth. I never want to say the last, but again, another fantastic sort of painting from him.
Yeah, this painting here was it was done for 23 Squadron when they disbanded not that long ago, 2000. Oh, it is actually a fair while ago now. How time flies. It was done to commemorate the disbanding of 23 Squadron. This is a picture of Hawker Harts from the era of 1935, flying over RAF Waddington as it was at the time. I don't believe that Hawker Harts were flying from Waddington at the time, but the squadron was there and was disbanded there. So I was asked to picture these particular aircraft flying over Waddington as it was at that particular time. It's a joy to paint biplanes. There's such a lovely sort of wind in the teeth, sort of open air sort of feeling that you get from from this kind of aircraft.
So you much prefer to paint older, sort of more historical aircrafts than the modern aircrafts?
Oh yes, I think I think older aircraft have a lot more character. They tend to be designed by people's imagination rather than sort of a wind tunnel and a computer, which sort of gives you the most aerodynamic shape. They're less mechanical. They're more. It's the same as anything that's old cars, old ships, and as it was with old aeroplanes, they just have that sort of that look about them. It's sort of it's very elegant and sort of rustic looking, and certainly in terms of biplanes.
Right, this is nice because it's got the interest of the boats in it as well. Who was this commissioned for?
This was one of my most recent commissions, 2013. It was commissioned by a lady I used to work with at RAF Waddington for her husband. He was only a chief tech, but he loved his aircraft, and one of his last tours while in the RAF was at St Morgan in Cornwall in the late 60s, early 70s. This is the very last of the Shackletons to fly, the T4, which is basically an upgraded Mark I, so it still has that sort of Lancaster Second World War look about it. And he wanted it flying out of St Morgan, or his wife did rather, wanted it flying out of St Morgan with the sort of the seascape in the foreground, and it gave me an opportunity to develop my painting style and to practice something other than just aircraft in the sky. So I've really enjoyed producing pictures of the boats and the sea and the landscape and everything that goes with it, and I think all the work that I put into has come to fruition. I'm very, very pleased with this painting, and one of a few that I would actually have back if I had the choice. This would certainly be one of them.
Were those boats picked for a particular reason, or are they just a boat?
They, I looked up, sort of basically Googled, if you like, Cornish fishing boats, and so to make sure that I had the right sort of craft for the right sort of part of the world, and then I picked these views as being the most synonymous with this type of seascape and the part of the world that it's portraying.
Is there a particular significance for this painting?
This painting is one that I still own. I don't know where the gentleman who commissioned it is these days.
Right.
So he seemed to disappear off the face of the earth. This was depicting the Handley Page Halifax Friday the 13th. It's called Friday the 13th, The Last Trip Out. This particular aircraft flew more operations than any other aircraft, any other single aircraft during the Second World War. 128 sorties it went out on, and broke all the records. It was its last trip out. Like I say, it did 128 sorties, and there are, if you'd like to count them along the side, there are 127 bomb markings. At the end of the war, this aircraft was taken apart and reassembled in, I believe it was Trafalgar. No, it wasn't. Oxford Street, Oxford Circus, as part of the celebrations at the end of the Second World War.
So who gave it the name Friday the 13th?
I believe it was the skipper of the aircraft itself, who was heavily anti-superstition. There was a lot of superstition attached to aircraft, and there is a theory that he named it Friday the 13th because he didn't believe in luck.
Right.
So he was going to call it Friday the 13th and adorn the nose with all the so-called unlucky symbols. There's the Grim Reaper, there's the inverted horseshoe, and flying in the face, if you like, of all the superstition that went with flying aircraft. And it ended up breaking all records, as I say, and flying more operations than any other aircraft.
So I take it this sort of aircraft was prone to getting shot down during the war?
Well, this was part of Bomber Command's Bomber Command's mainstay, if you like. There was these Halifaxes and the Lancasters and the Stirlings. The amount of losses were horrendous during the whole bombing campaign, and for an aircraft to last more than about sort of 15 or 20 operations was almost unheard of.
Right, so this is a painting called Following the Light. Why is it called Following the Light?
This painting is called Following the Light Back Home. It depicts the P-51 Mustang, big beautiful doll, flown by Colonel John D. Landers, who was the last American station commander at RS Duxford during the Second World War. They were escorting B-17s and any other American bombers back from Germany because they had long-range tanks and could follow them into enemy territory and back again. But obviously, having bombed their affected targets during the afternoon, they then have to get back as quick as they can, and that's why it's called Following the Light Back Home. And so it's as the sun sets, they're being escorted back to the UK.
Wow. Okay, this is very different considering it's painted at night. Who was this originally commissioned for?
This was commissioned by a gentleman, a sergeant who I worked with at RAF Waddington. He had always had a fascination with this particular event. It took place over Grantham during the last war, where a night fighter, Junkers 88 German night fighter, collided with an airspeed Oxford training aircraft, and the two of them came down. The Oxford disintegrated and fell out of the sky. The Junkers 88 limped away with a burning engine and crashed in a field a few miles away.
Which plane is which?
The German aircraft is the Junkers 88, which hit the underside of the airspeed Oxford, the British two-seater trainer, and both aircrew were killed from the Oxford. The Junkers 88, as I say, crash landed a few miles away, but it all took place over Grantham at night, and it was witnessed by an ARP warden who just consequently described the event. It was quite a challenge for me to be able to paint something like this. How do you paint something in the dark of two aircraft colliding and still be able to see what's actually happening?
Right.
The chap who commissioned it from me does actually own a piece of the Junkers 88, the German aircraft. I don't know exactly which bit, but he has part of it as a memento of this particular event.
Right. Did you find it difficult to paint at night, as none of the other pictures have been at night?
Yes, it's quite a challenge. As well as being able to find an aerial view of Grantham during that particular part of history, that turned out to be the easy bit. How dark to paint it and still be able to see what's going on is another thing. Initially, it was too light. The sky and part of the background just wasn't dark enough, and I had to sort of throw caution to the wind and throw lots of darker shades at it in order to bring out the right effect. But I think I've managed to achieve it. So you can see what's going on. You can see that it's above a particular part of the countryside and Grantham itself, as well as being able to see that it's taking place at night.
Right. So what research did you do into finding out what Grantham looked like in that period of history?
Well, again, I was fortunate enough to be able to find on the internet aerial views of Grantham, and in particular the church, which was in the vicinity of the collision that took place. It was just pure luck, really, and so therefore made it very, very easy to accurately portray that particular town as it was then in the composition of this painting.
Right. So where was this taken? This is a more sort of derelict looking scene.
This is one of my latest paintings. It was commissioned by a gentleman in the village where I live. He has visited Ypres in Belgium on several occasions, and it has a fascination and an interest in anything that's First World War, and particularly biplanes of that era. The SE5, which is in this painting, is being in question. So he wanted a painting of SE5s, a trio of SE5s on a sort of a dawn patrol, flying over, in this particular case, the bombed out cathedral town of Ypres, which was heavily bombarded and completely devastated during that period of history. He wanted to capture, or me to capture, the devastation of what was going on the ground, while sort of almost being detached from that by flying over the scene at that time of the day.
Right, so this looks like a print of the Augsburg raid. When was this originally painted?
This was painted in 2001. This was to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Augsburg raid. Two squadrons, one of which was 44 Squadron, took off from RAF Waddington on the Augsburg raid during the day. One of the last sort of important daylight raids that the RAF did. And this was, like I say, done to commemorate that particular event. And there were a limited edition run of prints made. In particular, we managed to get the signatures of two of the surviving, or the only two surviving members of the raid. Bert Doughty, who was on 44 Squadron, who was the front gunner in T Tommy, the Lancaster in the front there, and a gentleman called Pat Dorhill, who was John Nettleton's co-pilot. John Nettleton receiving a VC for this particular raid, and one of the few people to actually get back from it. It was fascinating to meet Bert, and I spent half a day just talking to him, and he described the scene where various aircraft had come down, showed me maps, and did a lot of talking and described the whole event in great detail. And that for me was a real privilege, to have the connection between someone who was actually there and something that I was portraying. Bert Doughty has since died, but you know, this is what happens in this day and age, is that people from this era are, you know, fast disappearing off the radar, and you don't get the chance to speak to them, you know, in person anymore.
Do you find it easier to paint pictures of real events, of things that actually happened?
Yes, this is part of what I enjoy doing. It's not only the research, but it's actually capturing pieces of history that I find really fascinating. It's the backstory to a lot of these pictures. And as I say, if you've got a direct connection, i.e. with someone like Bert, who was actually there, then it links the whole thing together. But you know, being able to portray certain things as they happened is what sort of is one of the main interests, and some of the what drives me to paint what I paint.
Fantastic. Well, thank you to you both for joining us in the studio.
Thank you.
Thank you.